UK inflation is taking a break, so is the Bank of England ready to catch up. This is Macro Matters and we're talking about the UK. Catherine Mann has never been shy about staking out her position. Since joining the Bank of England in 2021, she's become one of the most forceful dovish voices, warning that years of high inflation have left lasting scars. Now inflation has fallen to its lowest level since March 2025, and markets are betting that rate cuts are coming. So is Mann's argument starting to win the day? Let's ask Liz Martins, senior UK economist at HSBC. So Liz, petrol and airfares helped pull January inflation down to a 10-month low, but services inflation is still sticky. Is this just a temporary reprieve?
No, we do think inflation has now peaked. Service inflation a little bit higher than maybe some were expecting, although it was in line with our own forecast, and momentum is returning to something much more normal. So we think overall headline inflation and indeed services inflation have peaked, and where we'll see that really noticeably should be in the month of April. If you think back to last year, we had awful April where all kinds of household prices went up at the same time and it led the overall rate to jump. Now, this year I'm calling less awful April. So a lot of those rises will still come through, but to a much lesser extent, and that will mathematically reduce the annual rate of inflation in April in particular. So hopefully that will provide some relief.
Well, the unemployment rate has risen to its highest level since the pandemic, and wage growth is slowing. So is this the start of something more worrying for the labour market?
Well, the labour market is a bit of a worry. I think there's two narratives out there. So one narrative, the optimistic one, and if you talk to recruiters, you'll hear this, is that actually there's a lot of demand for new hiring was pent up because of budget uncertainty. You know, people waiting for the budget, waiting for Christmas, and we'll start to see some of those jobs being filled now. But I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of that yet. And we've got some quite timely data on new job postings, for example, which haven't seen much of a recovery at all into the new year. And of course, we're quite a long way past Christmas now, and we still haven't seen that recovery.
Well, the big question, Liz, the latest data has reinforced expectations of a rate cut in March and June. Does that align with your outlook, and how quickly do you see rates coming down this year?
Yeah, so we have 3 cuts in our own forecast this year, down to taking bank rate to 3% by the end of the year. To be honest, the timing of those cuts is incredibly uncertain. The Bank of England sort of, the messaging changes seemingly from one meeting to another. So it does jump around in terms of expectations. At the moment, the market is pricing very high probability that the next cut will come on the 19th of March. And generally speaking, the BOE probably doesn't want to deliver a big surprise to the market. So March is possible, April is definitely possible as well if they want to wait and see a few more bits of data. And then I think it will all come down to the combination of that data that we've been talking about. Does unemployment continue to rise or does it stabilise? But we do think they can cut 2 more times this year and ultimately get to 3% by the end of the year, whether it's sooner or perhaps takes a bit longer.
Well, Chief Economist Hugh Pill has warned that rates may need to stay higher for longer. Is agreement and consensus among the MPC still a long way off?
Yeah, there's a pretty clear divide in the MPC between people who think the biggest worry at the moment is soft demand, rising unemployment, the risk of ultimately an undershoot in inflation, and those who think the biggest risk is for inflation to, stay high or maybe even pop back up again. And, to be honest, it is a very uncertain time. And I think both of those arguments can be compelling. At the moment, though, I think the dovish side is winning the argument from the data. We've talked about slowing pay growth, rising unemployment, lower inflation. And so at the moment, the dovish side is kind of just about winning the argument. But as we move through the year, we'll find out whether, some of those hawkish concerns do prove right. Because after all, companies have been under a lot of pressure. Margins have been squeezed, and if companies want to rebuild those margins, they may want to put prices up down the line. So, I think Hugh Pill's concerns are absolutely justified. It's just a really uncertain time. So I think the near-term outlook is a bit more dovish, but there is a big question mark over the medium term.
Well, finally, Liz, some are saying that the UK bonds are expected to rally in 2026, but showing borrow costs are lowest since 2024 maybe. What's your outlook for gilts?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few different factors here. I mean, on the one hand, you have got still heavy issuance and still got a sizable fiscal deficit, which is part of the reason why yields have stayed higher. But if we are right and bank rate is coming down to 3%, that's a bit lower than what the market is pricing at 3.25, then that should open up some scope for slightly lower gilt yields. Of course, politics is always a risk to that, and uncertainty plays into that. But yeah, I think slightly low yields is absolutely possible.
That was Liz Martins from HSBC. Don't forget, you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.